World War II is the most widespread and destructive war in human history. The death toll is somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 80 million. We'll never know for sure. If you're wondering how do you misplace 20 million dead people, we find mass graves that we didn't know about, and also we get into the archives of countries that aren't very open, like China and Russia. But somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 80 million people will die. Just so you know, in every case in human history where there is mass death in wars or pandemics, the number is always lower at first. It is always underestimated. The same thing will be true with COVID. Unless it defies all of human history, which it won't, but that is true in every single war and every single pandemic. The United States alone will lose some 400,000 Americans dead, 600,000 wounded. The single most affected country in the world was, in terms of losses, is the Soviet Union. When I was in graduate school, it was like 20 million, and now we know it's somewhere closer to 35 million people will die. We will never have a war of this scale again. It is the first and last war of its kind. And the reason I can say that with certainty is because the level of destruction and the level of sacrifice, we will sooner nuke ourselves into oblivion than go through another war like that. So it is obviously vitally important to understand. There's so much to World War II, and obviously I will be leaving out a whole lot. There are people that studied this their entire lives, and they are always learning new things because there's just so much happening everywhere. But the thing that you must know, you must understand about World War II, in order to understand everything that will happen in World War II, is the concept of total war. There are different kinds of war. Total war is a war not just between two militaries, but between nations, and all the nations are fighting with the objective of complete and utter annihilation. It's not just the militaries, it's also the entire economies of nation and the civilian population. So everyone is involved. In a total war, there are no civilians. That's why every single nation in the world will target civilian populations, because the civilian population is just as instrumental in winning the war as the military is. So there are no civilians in total war. And all sides attack civilian populations because of that. And that's the only way you can understand World War II, is to understand that there aren't civilians. That's the only way to understand the atrocities that will take place. And also the dropping of the atomic bomb. So make sure you understand that concept. In the United States, America will become the arsenal of democracy. And this is really important to understand from the United States perspective, because the United States becomes the biggest arms dealer in human history. The United States will arm and supply every nation, every allied nation in the world. And it's sending, of course, weapons and food, but it's sending everything. It's sending mattresses. It's sending everything to every nation, allied nation in the world, that will help them to fight World War II and to help them win. This is what will make every part of the United States affected. Every American will be involved in this effort, and every industry, every company in the United States will be involved in this. It's from this period on that the United States will completely give up isolation and non-intervention. I say that, but in the 2020s, apparently, there are a lot of people that want to go back to isolation and non-intervention. So maybe we'll go backwards. I don't know. But these two concepts are vitally important to understand in order to understand World War II. Now, I'm going to give you a very, very brief background of the road to World War II. It started in 1939. The United States will join in 1941. And there are two distinctly different but related fronts, Asia and Europe. In terms of Asia, Japan was considered a world power, and it was a relatively small country for its size. I think it is a land area about of Texas. Now, just like with all the other European nations, just like the rest of the world, what Japan was afraid of is the United States. The United States is the most powerful country. It was the most economically powerful country the world ever seen. And if Japan wants to compete with the United States and with Russia, it had to expand. So Japan will start expanding. First, in 1910, it takes over Korea, and then it waits a few years, and then 1931, it will take Manchuria. Waits a few more years, and then in 1937, it will invade China. Now, when Japan invades China, they are violating America's open door policy, the one established by Teddy Roosevelt's administration. Said the United States expects all countries to respect the territorial integrity of China. Now, when they did this, the United States obviously could have said, okay, just do what you want to do, but it didn't. The United States took a hardline stance from the very beginning and said, get out or else. From the very beginning, the United States took a hardline stance, and that is what will set the United States and Japan on the road to war with each other and on the road to Pearl Harbor. Now, this angered Americans, but it was not considered a matter of national security. What was happening in Europe, that was a matter of national security, according to the leaders at the time, especially Franklin D. Roosevelt. In Europe, we had the rise of fascism. Fascism was founded by Benito Mussolini, Il Duce, the leader. 1922, he will take over, he will be elected to Parliament, and he will take over. And by 1925, he is the dictator of Italy. He has complete control. He has gotten rid of all of his opponents and is the dictator of the country. Now, while Italy is important, obviously, that it was the second-rate fascist country. Italy was not the country that Americans were concerned about. They just were not as good of a military. One example, they tried to invade Ethiopia, which Ethiopia is not considered a world superpower, and they lost. The Germans, the Nazis, had to come in and save them. Winston Churchill had so many memorable, great lines. One of them was, in World War I, the Italians, we had to side with the Italians. In World War II, the Germans have to have them. So, nothing against Italians, nothing against Italy, but it was not the country of concern. Obviously, that was the Germans. The Germans, remember, were the second industrial power of the world, besides the United States. And they had the best military, arguably, the world had seen since the Spartans. It is one of the most militaristic countries in the world. You can tell a lot about a country by their language. That's what we call culture. Language is a big part of culture because language reflects a society's values. And it's like Eskimos have like 105 words for snow. The Germans had, I think it was 86 different words for wars and types of battle. They took war very seriously, and they were very, very good at it. Germany, if you remember, was absolutely devastated from World War I. A very proud nation was forced to pay reparations, and they were forced to say that they were responsible. And between World War I and World War II, the country is absolutely devastated. My slides are out of order. In the 1920s, it is the best example of hyperinflation, or printing up so much money that it becomes worthless. The sweeping German marks down the gutter because they printed up so much they were worthless. And then, when the Great Depression happened, if you remember from the Great Depression lecture, Germany was only able to pay reparations because it was borrowing money from the United States. So when the Great Depression hit, U.S. banks collapsed, U.S. government U.S. banks stopped giving loans to the Germans. Germans defaulted on their debt to the French and the British, and twice during the 1920s, the French will come into Germany and take over part of their industrial centers or their manufacturing centers and run it for France. So you have a very proud, very powerful nation, very militaristic nation that was absolutely humiliated and desperate. And that is really important. That is what will lead to the rise of Hitler and the National Socialist Party. Hitler was only able to come to power because he rode the wave of discontent. Remember, dictators come from bad economies and people, especially people that are economically desperate. So he will rise the wave of discontent. If you want to know the formula for being a dictator, one, it's a discontent population that's unhappy for some reason. Two, it's really important, you offer easy solutions. You make very complicated situations sound like it's very easy and only you can solve it. So if you ever hear a leader say, only I can solve it, then you should always be worried about that. And three, tell people that they are perfect. Tell the population, you guys are perfect. There's nothing wrong with you. It's them. It's the others. And who the others are, it varies wildly. But that is the formula. You tell the population what they want to hear, which is that they are perfect, and there is another group that is responsible for all their problems. It's called othering. It is based on humans' history of tribalism. Humans naturally want to be in tribes and in competition, so you just promote that because it is the natural. Humans resort back to that very, very quickly. Now, something that you absolutely must know, because people get this wrong all the time, is what is fascism? And this is really important to know because people say really dumb things about this, like Hitler was a vegetarian, so vegetarians are fascists. Hitler also had blue eyes, so are people with blue eyes fascist? Of course not. there are certain characteristics of fascists, and this is based on what fascists themselves said. First, they are anti-communist, anti-socialist. Socialist is in their title, but they do not believe in Marx-style socialism or communism. So they are anti-communist, anti-socialist. And that is, people get hung up on but it's in the name, but yeah, they are very much against socialism and communism. Socialism and communism are based on the premise that people are equal. Workers are all equal and they're all going to get along. And fascists do not believe that. So they are anti-communist, anti-socialist. Functionally, they'll look very similar. You know, they hate each other so much they look very similar, but they are opposed to each other. Second, they are anti-democratic. They do not believe in democracy because fascists believe that there are superior people and inferior people. And that is inherently against democracy. Third, they believe in totalitarianism, rule by a single individual. And that also is socialism and communism, hypothetically, they're supposed to not be run by dictators. They are, but they're theoretically not supposed to be. But fascists, they believe very strongly in totalitarianism and having a dictator. Fourth, state capitalism. That is their economic system. That means a capitalist system. So companies are privately owned. They're not taken over by the government like in a socialist government. But those companies do what the government wants. They do what the dictator wants. So they are privately owned, but they are run by a dictator. But they do whatever the dictator tells them to do, what the government wants them to do. And fifth, what the government is based on in the fascist system is military and police state. And that is very important. The military and police are glorified above all else. The military and police have different laws and different rules than the rest of society. They are allowed to get away with whatever they want. They can get away with, whatever, but a lot more. They are glorified. That is the height of fascist society, is the police state and the military state. And six, they always have a other. They always have someone that they will blame for all their problems. And obviously, in the case of the Nazis, it is the Jews. That is why 6 million Jews will be killed over the course of World War II. Hitler will come to power be elected chancellor in 1933. One thing that people get confused all the time is they say that he was elected democratically, or the majority of Germans supported him, and that is not true. The most he will get is a little over 43%. But he had the most desperate, the most angry, the most armed, and the most violent people supporting him. The people supporting him were willing to use violence to stay in political power. You do not need the majority of the population, as long as you have the angriest, most well-armed part of the population that are willing to use violence for political ends. So Hitler will be elected with 43% of the vote, and then he will take complete control and serve as the Führer. Now, the objective of the Germans, just like with the Japanese, is what's called Lebensraum. Lebensraum means living space. Hitler, in one sense, was rational. And that is in terms of him understanding that Germany could not compete with the United States and with the Soviet Union because it was too small. Didn't have the resources, didn't have the natural resources. So, in that, he is accurate. He was absolutely correct when he looked at the numbers, when he looked at what Germany had, how big it was. He was absolutely correct in believing that it could not compete with the United States Soviet Union. So that is one area that he was correct. Where he gets to be insane is he believed that there was a world Jewish conspiracy centered on the United States and Soviet Union. And so he had to do this to stop what he called world Jewry. Not jewelry, Jewry. So he will, a lot of the decisions he makes, especially the terrible ones when he becomes the military leader, are based on that understanding, that there's a world Jewish conspiracy. Just a side note, he was unfortunately knowledgeable about some of U.S. history. He knew a decent amount about U.S. history, more than I wish he knew. And for a long time, he really looked up to the United States. He thought the United States was a great nation that should be emulated. And he thought a lot of things about the United States was great. One thing he said is, I'm doing in Europe what the Americans did what the Americans did in America. Removing technologically inferior people so superior people can take and use their land. He was talking about what the Americans did with the Native Americans. The thing is, that is just not an inaccurate statement. Now, obviously, the Nazis, they take it to another level, but here's a question for you. Why? Why did they execute 6 million Jews? Why did they execute so many people? And the answer is very simple. In the United States, the United States will take any land Native Americans have that they want. Americans move them to reservations, and then if there's gold on there, they'll move them again and take their land. The difference is in the United States, it's absolutely massive. So, like the state of Oklahoma was called Indian Territory because some surveyors from the government went out there and said, boy, this place looks terrible, let's put Native Americans here. So in the United States, it's so large, we were able to move the population, Native American population. There is no equivalent Oklahoma in Europe. It's too small. So that is the major difference, is geography, but functionally living space, taking land to create a Third Reich. So Hitler will come to power, and he makes it very clear that he is going to expand. He starts off by taking Austria in 1938. Now, he was Austrian. A lot of Austrian people were very supportive of Germany, so they didn't mind very much. When they did this, the world was so disillusioned from World War I, and no one wanted a war, so he just got away with this. But then he made it very clear he wanted to take the Sudetenlands. Sudetenlands is that red area in Czechoslovakia. Now, he made it very clear he was going to take those. And a lot of the people in those areas did actually support the Germans and were pro-German, just like Crimea. Vladimir Putin took Crimea. A lot of people in Crimea were pro-Russian. That is also true in the Sudetenlands. The only problem is the president of Czechoslovakia said, no, we will not give you Sudetenlands. And the president of Czechoslovakia had an alliance with France. France had an alliance with England. So Czechoslovakia assumed that France would come to their side, and then England would have to come to their side also. That didn't happen. Instead, the French and the British will meet with Adolf Hitler and his sidekick, Mussolini, and they will give the Sudetenlands to Hitler. They even made it clear, like, okay, you're going to take the Sudetenlands, and then that's it, right? You're done. And it was like, oh, yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's all I want, the Sudetenlands. So France and England will hold a conference and give the Sudetenlands to Hitler. They didn't even invite the president of Czechoslovakia. So he wasn't even in attendance. So Hitler will get the Sudetenlands without even firing a bullet. It's called appeasement, and it is one of the great catastrophes of World War II. People use the appeasement thing all the time to say now we shouldn't, today we shouldn't ever talk to or negotiate with enemies, and it's a dumb use of history. But this was a massive mistake. Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of England, will go back and say, we have established peace in our time. In fairness to the French and the British, their populations did not want war. Americans did not want war. So it's not like just the leadership is doing this. No one wanted war, except the Germans. So they will give over the Sudetenlands, and once they get the Sudetenlands, the Germans will wait a whopping 6 months before they will invade and take the rest of Czechoslovakia. At this point, England and France finally realized that Hitler, they could not appease him. And they knew where he was going next, and that was Poland. Hitler had his eye on Poland, and so England and France, they will set up an alliance with Poland. So an attack on one is an attack on all. There is only one thing stopping Hitler from taking Poland: the Soviet Union. So, during the summer of 1939, all countries were trying to get Joseph Stalin to side with them, because that is the only thing that could possibly stop Hitler from, or the Nazis from invading Poland. Unfortunately, Stalin only wanted one thing: Poland himself. He also wanted Poland. France and England couldn't give that to him, but Hitler could. So, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union will create the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. It's also usually called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact because of the name of the two diplomats, or the Hitler-Stalin Pact. But Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact said two things. One, the countries would not attack each other for 10 years. And two, that they would split Poland down the middle. Once the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact was signed, that was it. Nothing was stopping Hitler, nothing was stopping the Nazis, and they will roll into Poland in 1939. And once they attack Poland, England and France will declare war on Germany. Germany will declare war back, and that is the beginning of World War II. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to talk about a lot of the military parts, because it is such a fascinating war, and not just to military historians. It's fascinating for all sorts of reasons. The Germans will overwhelm the entire continent of Europe very quickly. May of 1940, they will take over France and The rest of Europe falls. Very soon it is just the British left standing. The only thing that saved the British is that they're on an island and they have the best navy in the world. The Germans will even loose the Luftwaffe, the German military, and they will bomb the hell out of cities. They try to intimidate the British by bombing cities, bombing civilians, which again goes back to that concept. Total war, there are no civilians. Everyone is fair game when the objective is the complete annihilation of the enemies. Just a random side note. The Nazis will do this so incredibly fast. The word that is always associated with them is blitzkrieg. It means lightning war. Again, they had 86 different words for war. They didn't actually use that word very much. They used Bewegungskrieg. It means war of movement because they were moving really, really fast. Stalin's Krieg is a stalled war. That was what World War I was. But they will fight a Bewegungskrieg where they are just moving really fast. And all throughout graduate school, World War II was one of my areas of study. People would talk about how amazing the German military was and how were they able to accomplish these amazing feats and just overrun, because it really was amazing how fast they were able to travel, just within days, just overrun entire countries. And everyone talked about, like, oh, they're so good militarily, which is true, but this is also the industrialization of pharmaceuticals. The Nazi military, the entire country of Germany, they were so doped up on cocaine, Adderall, meth. I mean, they were just doped up. Like, I didn't learn that till years later. There's a good book on it called Blitzed. There's also, I think, a documentary on Netflix, but they were taking so many drugs. And Adderall is legalized speed, essentially, but they called it Pervitin, but that's how they did it. That's how they were able to sit for like 3 days in a row and just drive. And the French were like, how did they possibly do that? Oh, it's because they wanted it so bad. It's no. They were drugged to all holy hell and back. That's how they did it. They were good in the their military was phenomenal. Not praising Nazis, but in terms of just military tactics, strategy, Germans took it to a new level. But yeah, they were on so many prescription drugs, and cocaine, Adderall, just tons and tons of it.